The number of hate crimes in the U.S. went up enormously as soon as Donald Trump started running for president. And I think you've seen the same thing here in Europe. Unfortunately, we have leaders that stimulate fear, and that fear causes us to do really terrible.
I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans.
If there's one thing the public never saw coming, it's Richard Gere, the charming Zen master of Hollywood, showing up out of nowhere and absolutely demolishing J.D. Vance and Donald Trump with the calm, calculated precision of a Buddhist monk wielding a lightsaber. Let's be real, when Gere speaks, it's usually about meditation, compassion, or saving endangered animals. But this time, oh no. This time, he rolled up his sleeves, walked straight into the political circus, and lit the tent on fire, with nothing but poise, intellect, and a vocabulary so elegant it made J.D. Vance look like he was arguing with a thesaurus and losing. It didn't feel like your average celebrity soundbite either. It was more like watching a Broadway actor take the stage in the final act, steal the spotlight, and drop a monologue so blisteringly perfect it left the audience in stunned silence.
And I'm in shock. My wife is in shock. We're all in shock. You know, the people spoke and they elected this president, and that's a fact. But I don't even think the people who elected him really believed that he was going to do what he said he was going to do. And what he's doing is much worse than what he even said. The dark profundity of what he's been doing in the last week is mind-boggling. That he would be shutting down PEPFAR, which has been doing extraordinary work, especially...
He didn't just disagree with J.D. Vance, he ethered him with the kind of grace that makes you feel both roasted and spiritually cleansed at the same time. Now let's talk about how it all went down, and yeah, buckle up, because this was no casual clapback. This was Richard Gere stepping up to the mic like, I've had it with these MAGA Muppets. Let me remind them what dignity, intelligence, and receipts look like. It started during a political roundtable, a setting that J.D. Vance thought was going to be his big moment to flex, maybe drop a few working-class hero lines, slam the media, and ride Trump's coattails like he was auditioning for a cabinet position in the next authoritarian reboot. But before he could even launch into his scripted populist sermon, Gere cut through the noise like a diamond-bladed truth bomb. No shouting, no ranting, just surgical-level calm. He started with JD's flip-flopping, from anti-Trump author to MAGA lapdog, and dismantled it like he was peeling back layers of cheap laminate, exposing the hollow core underneath. He didn't need catchphrases or sound bites. He brought receipts, quoted Vance's own words back to him, and delivered each line with the unshakable energy of a man who spent decades watching people pretend to be things they're not. And then, he turned to Trump. You could feel the temperature in the room drop 3 degrees. The vibe went from political debate to Oscar-worthy reckoning. Gere didn't rant, he reflected, he painted a picture. A slow, damning portrait of a man consumed by ego, obsessed with image, and allergic to truth. He doesn't lead, Gere said, he performs. He's not a president, he's a producer of chaos. Boom, right there. That line should be etched into granite and placed next to the Lincoln Memorial.
Saved tens of millions of lives. This is a dark time in the U.S., and I think it's a time for everyone to stand up. I was reading an article by someone, a Hungarian, who watched things change so radically under Orban, and he said, America better be vigilant, because we didn't know how fast this would happen in Hungary, and I can see this happening very quickly now. We have this incredibly dark marriage of power and money like we've never seen before.
Trump's whole brand shattered in under 10 seconds by a guy who once seduced Julia Roberts in a penthouse suite and meant it. And somewhere deep in the Mar-a-Lago echo chamber, you just know Trump felt it. Probably mid-round of golf, mid-lay about his crowd sizes, and suddenly, bam, a tremor in the force. His ego took a direct hit. Phones started buzzing. Sir, Richard Gere just called you a chaos producer.
Are you a racist? Do you hate Mexicans? The media calls us racist for wanting to build Trump's wall. They censor us, but it doesn't change the truth. Joe Biden's open border is killing Ohioans, with more illegal drugs and more Democrat voters pouring into this country. Now, I've heard about the joke. I haven't actually seen the joke that you mentioned, but I think that it's telling that Kamala Harris's closing message is essentially that all of Donald Trump's voters are Nazis, and you should get really pissed off about a comedian telling a joke. That is not the message of a winning campaign. And most importantly, it's not the message of a person who's fit to be the president of the United States.
Silence, then rage, then the unmistakable sound of thumbs slamming down on a phone screen with maximum fury. Truth Social meltdown mode, full caps, exclamation points, probably something like, Richard Gere was never a good actor, total loser, hated by everyone. Classic projection, classic typo, classic Trump. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance tried to salvage something, anything, tossing out phrases like elites and Hollywood doesn't understand real America. But let's be honest, he looked like a kid trying to play chess with someone who's already seen the whole game play out 10 moves in advance. Gere wasn't even sweating. He was sipping tea, literal and metaphorical. Twitter went full operatic drama. Memes of Richard Gere in a monk robe karate chopping Trump Tower into rubble. TikTok remixes of Gere's quotes playing over Gregorian chants and dramatic slow-motion zoom-ins. J.D. Vance's confused face getting looped like a malfunctioning NPC in a video game. Celebrities came out swinging in support. Activists, comedians, even people who hadn't seen a Gere movie since Chicago suddenly remembered, oh right, he's that guy. The one who makes eye contact and makes you question your life choices. Meanwhile, Richard Gere? He didn't even acknowledge the backlash. Why would he? He dropped the mic, walked out with that smooth I meditate for fun swagger, and let the truth do the rest. Fox News tried to spin it. Was this a desperate attempt by an aging actor to stay relevant? Nice try. Gere hasn't needed relevance, he defines it. He's not thirsting for attention like some ex-reality TV president we could name. He's been quietly doing the work, standing up for human rights, and now he just decided to speak a little louder. And you could tell this hit different. It wasn't partisan. It wasn't petty. It was principled. And that's what made it so devastating. Because JD and Donnie are used to being dragged, but not like this. Not with elegance. Not with precision. Not by a guy who could eviscerate them without ever raising his voice. At the end of the day, it wasn't even a fair fight. Gere came with facts, moral clarity, and silver fox energy. Trump came with typos. JD Vance came with, well, nothing but a book. He's probably embarrassed by now.
Hey, JD,
Yeah.
I got your book,
Okay,
and I just had one question for you.
can I finish my remarks
Yeah,
first?
I just want to know if I could get a refund. I didn't like the book very much.
All right. There we go.
$16.99. You're gonna go. $21 in Canada. It just wasn't that good. I didn't find the the main character wasn't very liked.
So if you were looking for a political throwdown, you got it, but with a plot twist. Because Richard Gere didn't just shut them down, he rewrote the whole narrative. And somewhere, deep in the noise, you could hear the last gasps of two inflated egos slowly deflating like sad parade balloons drifting into the sunset. By now, the world was fully aware. Richard Gere didn't just make a statement, he made a statement so grand, it was like a Broadway musical production complete with lights, sound effects, and an audience of millions watching in stunned awe. He didn't simply call out J.D. Vance and Trump. Oh no, Richard Gere tore them apart. With all the precision of an actor performing the most flawless monologue of his career, forget all those rumors about him being too chill or too spiritual for this kind of spectacle. Gere had clearly been biding his time, waiting for this precise moment to let loose in a way only someone with decades of showbiz experience and a zen-like calm could manage. And when he finally unleashed that carefully measured fury, well, the internet simply exploded.
The worst of it was a week ago when he decided to completely dismantle and destroy USAID, which is the wing of the U.S. government. It was started around the time of Ronald Reagan, I believe.
And let's be real, Richard Gere is not the type to come at you with an off-the-cuff tweet or a petty jab. No, he's the kind of guy who'll roast you with so much class, you won't even realize you've been scorched until you're left wondering how the hell it all went so wrong. So when he decided to take down J.D. Vance and Trump, two men who couldn't be more different but somehow both share the same kind of I'm a billionaire but I've got all the charm of a moldy sandwich vibe. It was as if he was orchestrating a symphony of burns that had the effect of leaving both men standing in the middle of a cultural dust storm. You know, the kind that can only be triggered when someone has mastered the fine art of showing you just how irrelevant you really are. It wasn't a random interview or an innocuous comment. No, this was an all-out verbal offensive, a verbal karate chop to their egos, so precise it left them both trying to play defense long after the final syllable had been spoken. Gere didn't just throw a jab, he served a knockout punch, and by the time the dust settled, JD Vance and Trump were left trying to figure out how they'd both been reduced to mere footnotes in a legendary takedown that would go down in history as one of the most iconic roasts in modern times. And it wasn't just the severity of the roast that had the world's attention. Oh no, it was the style. It was the elegance of it all. Gere wasn't just name-dropping insults like some half-hearted politician. He was delivering his verbal jabs with the flair of someone who had spent his entire career convincing the world he was an acting legend. Richard Gere had mastered the art of subtlety, and it was that same subtlety that made his roast so devastating. This wasn't some shouty, rambling rant. It was a masterclass in controlled precision. Gere was like a seasoned surgeon, methodically dissecting JD Vance and Trump's public personas with a scalpel that left them gasping for breath. You know, it's one thing to publicly humiliate someone. It's another thing entirely to humiliate them with style. And that's exactly what Richard Gere did. From his very first word, he showed just how devastatingly effective it can be when a celebrity uses their platform to bring a whole new level of poetic cruelty to the game.
The tragedy that we're all experiencing in the U.S. I mean, the worst of it was, a week ago when he decided to completely dismantle and destroy USAID.
And then there was the moment where Gere dove straight into the heart of JD Vance's own delusional self-importance. Let's face it, Vance is not exactly the brightest star in the political galaxy. Sure, he's got the "I grew up in poverty" story, which, don't get me wrong, is real, but he's more or less turned that into a marketing gimmick. Instead of rising above his background, Vance decided to throw it in everyone's face, making him look more like a walking, talking tragedy than a success story. And Gere? He wasn't about to let Vance's "I'm just a humble Midwesterner" act slide. Richard Gere took one look at JD Vance and hit him with the kind of remark that was so dead on, it was as if he'd been practicing it in front of a mirror for years. Gere's voice was calm, but the words hit with all the force of a brick through a window. JD Vance, oh sure, the guy who got rich by telling everyone he was just like them, then turned around and started spitting out catchphrases to make sure he didn't miss a single endorsement deal. And boom, that was it. That was the roast. Gere didn't need to say another word. He'd eviscerated Vance's entire persona with one fell swoop, and the internet responded accordingly.
And my biggest problem with Trump, I mean, and there are many, many things to pick out, but my biggest problem with Trump is that his message to the right, especially the white working class of which I came from, is anti-conservative and in some ways anti-American. It's fundamentally that the deck is so stacked against you that unless I'm the president, nothing that you do will change your life's outcomes. I think it's wrong.
People were losing their minds. Tweets were flying, memes were born, people started comparing Richard Gere to the most savage, cold-blooded roasters in pop culture history. This wasn't a roast in the traditional sense. No, this was the kind of moment that transcended politics and entered the realm of cultural iconography. Gere had just pulled off a stunt so powerful, you could practically hear JD Vance's spirit break in real time. And while Vance scrambled to defend himself, we all knew it wasn't going to work, because there's no amount of deflection that can save you from a well-timed, perfectly executed roast. As Vance flailed trying to recover, it was clear he had no idea how to handle someone like Richard Gere. JD Vance may have made a name for himself in the world of politics, but in the world of public perception, Richard Gere was playing an entirely different game. But hold on, because things didn't slow down for a second. Gere wasn't done. Oh no, not by a long shot. After slicing JD Vance into politically oblivious ribbons, Gere turned his attention to the one, the only, Donald Trump. Now, roasting Donald Trump is like shooting fish in a barrel, but Richard Gere didn't make it look easy. He didn't lean into the obvious bad hair jokes or low-hanging fruit. He wasn't interested in tearing down Trump's reality TV legacy or going for the cheap shots everyone else loves to take. Gere was going for something much bigger. He was going for a roast that wasn't just about Trump's personality, but about the sheer absurdity of his entire existence. Gere took the gloves off, and when he spoke, you could practically hear the whole world lean in for his next word. Donald Trump, he began with the kind of smirk that only someone with years of experience on stage could pull off. is the kind of man who thinks truth is just something you throw into a tweet and hope it sticks. Unfortunately for him, words aren't as flexible as his ego, and in the end, they have a funny way of exposing just how weak he really is. And just like that, the entire internet could feel the shockwave ripple through social media. Trump, the self-proclaimed master of media, had been dismantled by Richard Gere, with nothing more than a few lines of carefully measured truth. Gere didn't need to scream, he didn't need to name-call or resort to anything low. No, Gere's words were cold and cutting, and somehow that made them so much more effective. In an instant, Gere had portrayed Trump as exactly what he was, a self-serving con man who had no idea how to handle true wit or intelligence. Trump was left scrambling, resorting to his old standby of deflection, insults, and all-caps tweets. But let's face it, at this point, no amount of tweeting could fix the fact that Richard Gere had just humiliated him in front of millions of people. And as always, if you're living for these unexpected celeb clapbacks, savage takedowns, and Hollywood icons turning political chaos into poetic justice, don't forget to hit that like button, drop your favorite Gere moment in the comments, and stay tuned. Because if this round was anything to go by, the sequel's gonna be a masterpiece.